I can't even film because the neighbor's dogs won't stop barking. Okay, I think they're done. I hope they're done. They're not done, but I think it's soft enough that you won't hear it. Okay, anyway. Hi, my name is Spencer and welcome to Sphinx Reads. Today I will be doing kind of a wrap-up video, but I'm new to booktube and this is just my first year doing it, and I haven't done like the monthly wrap-up videos, obviously, but still, I've read a lot of books this year and I thought I'd just make several videos kind of like wrapping up what I've read in the year 2020 based on a certain category. So today I want to talk about series or part of a series that I've read this year. So first of all, I read the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. This was the first time that I've read the entire series. I've read the first book before and I didn't really like it. But with all the surrounding hype about the upcoming show that's coming to Disney Plus, I decided to give it a shot. Also, since it's always been on my radar, like I knew I was gonna read it eventually someday. And so I did, and I actually enjoyed it. The first 3 books, I thought they were okay. Like, if I was like very hypercritical, I would have rated all of them like 3 or 3.5 stars. The first 2 books particularly were a little slow for me. The 3rd book was a little better, but not by a lot. But the 4th book, oh man, Battle of the Labyrinth, oh, it was so action-packed. It was so good. There was just a lot of things going on. And it was kind of the same for The Last Olympian, which is the 5th book in the Percy Jackson series. Personally, I thought Book 4 had a lot more action than Book 5, but Book 5 definitely had a lot more emotion. Like, Chapter 1, if you've read the Percy Jackson series, if you read the last book, you know what I'm talking about. Just in case there are people out there who may not be into pop culture, so you don't know a lot about what Percy Jackson is about. Basically, Percy Jackson is about this kid named Percy Jackson who discovers that he's the son of the Greek god Poseidon. And in the first book of the series, he is accused of stealing Zeus's lightning bolt. So the first book is kind of his journey or quest of finding out who the real lightning thief is, which is the title of the book. The second book, they go on a quest to rescue one of their friends. The third book is kind of the same. There's another one of the main characters who they have to save, so they go on that quest. They started barking again. I've also read the Heroes of Olympus series, which is the spin-off series to Percy Jackson. I honestly thought I would love the Heroes of Olympus series more than Percy Jackson, because when I was in high school, there was definitely more hype for the Heroes of Olympus series than there ever was for Percy Jackson. Like, obviously, you can't be a Heroes of Olympus fan without having read the Percy Jackson series first. It almost felt like those who liked Percy Jackson were just like kind of chill, but when the Heroes of Olympus series came, everyone was just like dying over it. I don't even remember what I was saying because I had to pause because neighbors' dogs were barking again. I'm kind of afraid to share my opinions and thoughts on it just because the Percy Jackson fandom has such a strong fan base, and I appreciate that. Most of my friends are Percy Jackson fans, and I consider myself a Percy Jackson fan to an extent. I just didn't really like Heroes of Olympus. I felt the story was kind of bland. Don't kill me, please. I just felt the entire series was really bland, for my taste at least. I do think that the Heroes of Olympus series did a lot in terms of representation, and I personally think that because Rick Riordan has become a popular author, because he deliberately chose to have more diversity in his books, more diverse middle grade books came out and became more popular since he wrote the Heroes of Olympus series. So in terms of what it's done, and honestly, the characters were okay. I just thought it was really odd that the main cast, they were all in love with each other, so a lot of things are very forgivable when it comes to middle grade. Your opinions are valid. If you like the Heroes of Olympus series, it was just not for me. Next is the Ink World Trilogy. So the first book is Inkheart and the second book is Inkspell, and then we have Inkdeath as the conclusion. I've read Inkheart and Inkspell before. Inkheart has been one of my childhood favorites. Still is a favorite, but rereading it this year, I was like, I saw more flaws and plot holes and things like that. So Inkheart follows Meggie and her father Mo, who has the abilities to read books and bring those books to life, or bring out characters into the real world. There's a lot that goes into it, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but basically that's the premise of the book. I did make a reading vlog when I was still on my other channel. That's why that reading vlog, even though it's here already on this channel, it's in color. Overall, I still liked Inkheart a lot. I still have it as a 5-star read. Rereading Inkspell this year, I liked it more than I did before, but I still liked it less than Inkheart. Inkdeath, we don't talk about Inkdeath. I feel like there were just a lot of problems with the last book in the trilogy that I didn't really enjoy it. I'll leave a link to the reading vlog for the Ink World Trilogy that I made. It's about an hour long, but I tried to like cut as many scenes and words as I could, so it's pretty fast-paced, I think. I personally think that Inkheart is best read as a standalone. Like, you could read just Inkheart and be totally satisfied. I think it's a pretty popular opinion that Inkheart is best as a standalone. Like, a lot of people, when they read the second and the third books, they were really disappointed and they just kind of wish that they hadn't. So that's kind of where I'm at too. The next one is the Spiderwick Chronicles. Man, I love this series. So it's illustrated. Each of the books are just like 150 or so pages each. There's 5 books. This is a middle grade series, obviously. So it follows this family, mainly the kids, Mallory, Jared, and Simon Grace. And they move with their mom to a new house that was owned by some distant relationship of their mother's named Arthur Spiderwick. Arthur Spiderwick was a guy who observed the fantastical world around him. The area around his house, I guess there were a lot of fae, and he was studying them. And Jared, he discovers like a field guide that Arthur Spiderwick had left, and he learns more about this world. You can honestly read this entire series in a day. The target demographic, I feel like this series could be read like a book a night for like, if you're a parent, if you're reading a book to your kid, like I think it would be a good idea to read one book each night to your kid because they're very short, but they are so well done. Like, I was so impressed by how good each of the books are, even though they're just really, really short. So needless to say, the Spiderwick Chronicles is one of my favorite series this year. There was a film adaptation too, and I really loved the film. I actually watched the movie when I was a younger kid, and it was one of my favorite movies of all time. Next up, the Mastermind series. This series is actually one of the many, many reasons that I decided to start booktube, just because there are not a lot of reviews for this book, and I think it's so underrated. So what it's about is these group of kids who live in this perfect town, fictional town called Serenity in New Mexico. Everyone in town has a job, all the houses look uniform, everyone is just really rich, I guess. But then one of the main characters, Eli, who is the son of the mayor of this town, he goes on this bike trip just outside the limits of this town with his best friend, and something happens, and he and his friends realize that something is up, like something is not right. It's hard to explain how much I love this series without spoiling like the huge plot twist of the first book. But let's just say it's very similar to the Maze Runner series. I know a lot of people don't like the Maze Runner. I personally do. In terms of writing, it's not like the Maze Runner at all because I know a lot of people have a problem with the writing of the Maze Runner. I'm talking about the actual story is very similar to the Maze Runner, but that's all I'm gonna say. Next, I've read the first 2 books because that's all that's been released so far of the A Tale of Magic series. So I've read A Tale of Magic and A Tale of Witchcraft by Chris Colfer. So this is actually a spin-off series to the Land of Stories series, which I believe was really popular among middle grade readers. So the Land of Stories series is pretty much about these twins who discover that their grandmother is the fairy godmother of the fairy tale world, where pretty much all the fairy tales are connected. So kind of like Once Upon a Time, but middle grade style. And the A Tale of Magic series is kind of like a prequel series to the Land of Stories. And it's pretty much the backstory of the fairy godmother. I enjoyed the first book a lot, but the second book I thought was too bland and possibly my least favorite of the entire series so far. If you're a big fan of having like great underlying moral themes in middle grade books, you might like the A Tale of Magic series. It just doesn't quite cut it for me. There's a lot of symbolism in these books about women's rights, LGBT rights, toxic masculinity, things like that. Here's the thing, I don't mind books having like really heavy moral themes, and I appreciate that Chris Colfer is making an effort to teach these things to middle grade readers. My complaint about this series is more on the tone of the story. I just thought it was like really preachy. It felt almost as if Colfer had a message first before he had a story, which is not always a bad thing. I just thought the execution of this story, just for the purpose of getting across a message, was really done poorly. Granted, Chris Colfer is a fairly new author, and I personally love how his stories flow. Like, when you read one of his books, they're just really fast-paced. It's like watching a movie. The Land of Stories is actually one of my favorite series of all time. I do think it's not for older readers. Technically, I'm a young adult, and I'm not necessarily in the target demographic of these books. But again, if I was a younger reader, I know that I would for sure love these books more. But personally, I think the A Tale of Magic series, like the spin-off, just don't quite cut it for me. Next is Furthermore and Witchwood by Tahara Mafi. So I reread Furthermore this year. I read it before, and if you're looking for a story that's very similar to Alice in Wonderland, just like the whimsical, nonsensical nature of exploring a different world or worlds within worlds, then Furthermore is the book for you. Also, if you like really flowery prose. Here's the thing though, like some people don't like flowery prose. I technically am not a big fan of flowery prose, but Tahara Mafi was very intentional in describing the world of Furthermore in this book, that it's just really vivid. It's a very colorful book. As you can tell by the cover, it's already colorful. Furthermore is about this girl named Alice Queensmeadow, and everything in her world is really, really colorful. I think she lives in this world called Fernwood, and in Fernwood, color is currency. Like people are valued because of their color, and Alice is as pale as milk except for her eyes. She lost her father when she was younger, and after a series of events, she goes on a quest to find her father and find out the reason why he had left them. I personally love this story, though I can see a lot of people disliking it just because of the prose and just the nonsensical nature of the story. Like, nothing makes sense in this world. If you're all about that, then Furthermore is the book for you. The sequel, Witchwood, which is technically also a standalone, like you don't have to read Furthermore to be able to appreciate Witchwood, I actually liked more than Furthermore. A lot of people like Furthermore more than Witchwood, but I loved Witchwood more just because it was less about like the world building and it was more character driven than Furthermore. Witchwood is about a girl named Laylee whose job is to pretty much clean the dead before she sends them off into like the afterlife, I think. It seems like a really dark premise, and it is kind of a really dark book. Like it would be a perfect like Halloween time book. So if you're looking for more darker middle grade, then Witchwood is the perfect book for you. So I'm gonna take a break from middle grade. The next series I want to talk about is the Kingkiller Chronicle. So the first book, The Name of the Wind, is one of the most popular adult fantasy books out there. It was recommended to me by a friend who is sort of a fantasy buff, and he gave this book so much praise. And man, it is a long book. I mean, longer than I'm used to, but it was so good. I think it's not a secret that the biggest merit in this series is Patrick Rothfuss, the author. His writing, oh my goodness, his writing is just chef's kiss. It's just immaculate. It's just very descriptive and immersive. The world building is fantastic. Delving into the main character's emotions was just absolutely perfect. The Name of the Wind is about the backstory of our main character named Kavoth. Kavoth is part of a trooper group, like they are like traveling actors. The book starts off in the future when he is already an old innkeeper. He encounters a guy who is called the Chronicler, and he kind of writes people's stories, and Chronicler finds Kavoth, who is now under the name Code. Kavoth is a really popular guy who has become sort of a legend in this world, and this book is about kind of his backstory. If I would break down The Name of the Wind into 3 parts, the first part is basically kind of just Kavoth's early youth, like traveling in a trooper group of the Ademaru. The second part has kind of an Oliver Twist feel to it, where he is, well, not to get into spoilers, but it's kind of like Oliver Twist. And then the third part has a very Harry Potter-like feel because he is at this university and learning a sort of magic system called sympathy. Magic system of this story is really subtle, but it's also really fascinating. I do want to mention though that as we go along in the story of The Name of the Wind, there are a lot of kind of tangents. For example, there is a part where Kavoth meets a storyteller, and that storyteller tells a popular legend, and those legends that are intertwined in the story, they kind of connect somehow to Kavoth's past and present and future, sort of. I honestly don't know if I'm making any sense here. I love The Name of the Wind. The second book, I also liked. I only liked it. I loved it for the most part, but towards the end was just like, If you're curious to know how I feel about the second book, which is The Wise Man's Fear, I'll just leave a link to X Catherine Reed's and Murphy Napier's videos, because they pretty much reflect what I dislike about the sequel. A lot of people have a problem with the part in the sequel where Kavoth spends some time with a certain fairy-like character, and not to get into the spoilers, but yes. A lot of people have complained that it's just Patrick Rothfuss like writing his sexual fantasies in this book. And though the story did spend a lot of time in that section, I honestly just blew through it. I feel like it was just because I was just like skimming it, like I don't need this part. Obviously there's a target audience for that. I know for sure that there are a lot of people who actually appreciated that part and didn't think it was too cringy. It's really a preference thing. The part after that, which a lot of people actually liked, I personally didn't. So Kvoth spends time with this group of people, like a tribe thing. It's predominantly women, I believe, and they're like super good with like martial arts. Well, it was really fascinating to learn about their culture because they mainly talk like using sign language, and the entire culture was fascinating. But after like 3-ish chapters spent in that area, I was just like done, and I was just like tired, and I just wanted the book to be over. I'm not a fan of huge books, but I love The Name of the Wind, but I didn't really love The Wise Man's Fear. I also read the spin-offs, like the story about Bast, the lightning tree, I think. It's one about Auri, like one of the more fascinating characters. I think it's the slow regard for silent things. I might be wrong. And there's the other one. Oh, it's like a short story, like How Old Holly Came to Be. I didn't like any of those. I thought they were really boring and really confusing. I know there's a huge... What? I can't speak. I know there's a huge fan base for the Kingkiller Chronicle out there, so don't kill me. It just wasn't to my taste. Next up is a work by a very controversial author. So I read the last book of the Harry Potter series. I know I'm way late to the hype. Read the first 6 books when I was in high school and I really enjoyed it, but after that, when I got to college, me and a few friends, we kind of like binge watched like all of the movies. And by the time we finished, I was like, well, I know the story. I don't need to read the book. I decided to finally read it this year, and I actually really liked it. The ending was a little too abrupt. I guess a little less dramatic as compared to the movie, but I still enjoyed like the entire journey that Harry, Ron, and Hermione went to kind of defeat Voldemort. I also read The Cursed Child. We don't really talk about that. Just kidding. So The Cursed Child was actually fine. I liked it, but the main reason that I didn't like it is because it didn't feel canon. Like, as a fan fiction for Harry Potter, it's pretty... I don't know. It's okay. I didn't hate it. I remember finishing reading the script and was like, this was fine. I don't get the major hate about this. But then the more I sat on it, if there's anything good about The Cursed Child, it's Scorpius. I love Scorpius Malfoy. And that's all I'm gonna say. The next books I'm gonna talk about are not technically a series. They're actually just 2 self-help books that are related to each other, and that is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and The 8th Habit, both written by Stephen R. Covey. So these are self-help business books. I guess they're more of self-help leadership books more than they are business. They don't talk a lot about money like a lot of self-help business books. I really love The 7 Habits of Effective People. I think more people should read it. I think just diving into things that help you become a great leader are things that a lot of people need to learn, including myself, and I may reread. No, I'm not going to reread it because it's too long. Self-help really isn't my genre. But I really loved learning about these 7 habits that help you become an effective person. I just pretty much explained the title. The 8th habit, I didn't really like it. I talk more about it in my reading vlog number 2, but I didn't really like it. I felt like it was just really repetitive and just reference a lot of things in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People anyways. So next one we're going to talk about is Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli. This is a duology. I haven't read the second one yet. I'm planning to read it before the year ends. But I have a feeling that the way I feel about Love, Stargirl, the sequel, will be pretty much the same as how I felt about Stargirl. So Stargirl is a middle grade, bordering on YA book about this kid named Leo who is kind of an introvert, and then there's this new girl in his school who calls herself Stargirl. It's a great book about nonconformity. Stargirl is kind of a weirdo. Initially, she makes a bad impression on the students of the school, but as she does more and more good stuff, helping people out in their problems and greeting people happy birthday and helping people be seen and cheering for other people, she becomes more popular. I decided to read this because I'd seen a trailer for the film adaptation on Disney Plus, starring Grace VanderWaal, no less. I actually enjoyed it. I didn't think it was like mind-blowingly good. It was just like, wow, this is a good message that I feel like more young people should read. I would put it in the same tier as R.J. Palacios' Wonder in terms of the message and just kind of the overfeel of the book. The next book I'm going to talk about is technically a sequel, like it's sort of an official sequel, but I feel like it really shouldn't be. And it is The Return of the Young Prince. It is technically, officially the sequel to The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I don't know how to say these people's names. And here's the thing. I thought it was really good. It was a standalone, and if it was not related to The Little Prince at all. Because the message was still really good, even though the setting is kind of pretty much just a conversation between a kid and an adult about life, and it's just like this really long conversation while they're taking this road trip. The Little Prince has become such a classic in literature that I just felt that this book was kind of a disservice to the original message of The Little Prince. Like, The Little Prince was all about innocence and simplicity and childhood, whereas this book was more deep in terms of like the philosophy that it was trying to teach. And in my opinion, that was just not true to the original source material. In a lot of ways, it felt like a really good fan fiction of The Little Prince. Next is How to Train Your Dragon. So I read the first book, so obviously the movies are really popular. I decided to read the first book, and it was okay. Obviously, it wasn't at all like the movie. Like, they're very different stories. Hiccup is pretty much the same in the book, but Toothless is not. I personally think if you're a young adult reader and older and you're into books for that target demographic, then this would be a 3 or 2 star read for most people. But for middle grade readers, this could be like a 3 or 4. Like, the story was really simple, really straightforward, not a lot of like shocking reveals or anything like that. It had a good message, and that's pretty much all I can say about it. I don't know if I'll ever read the rest of the series just because this one felt just like I didn't have like a lot of strong feelings about it. I might read it someday. I don't know. Next is I read a Goosebumps book, which I just kind of had to because I loved Goosebumps as a kid. One time I was just like, I'm in the mood for a Goosebumps book, and I can read one in a day, so I'm just gonna do it. I read My Hairiest Adventure, which turned out to be the worst Goosebump book I've ever read. Next is the Nevermoor series. So technically, it's not a finished series yet. There's 3 books that have been released. It has been getting a lot of hype and has been compared to Harry Potter. I personally don't think it's very Harry Potter-like. It's more lighthearted than Harry Potter. It has more of a Halloween feel. I guess Harry Potter has a Halloween feel too. They're both light and dark at the same time for different reasons. But basically, Nevermoor is about this girl named Morgan Crow. She is a cursed child. Everything that happens in her town is blamed on her because she was born on, I guess, like a cursed evening called Eventide. And then on the day where most kids get whisked away by a bunch of patrons into these really prestigious like schools and universities or boarding schools, whatever, she is instead whisked away by this man called Jupiter North, and she's whisked away into a land called Nevermoor. I didn't really like the first book too much. I thought it was okay, but part of me thinks it was because I didn't have the right expectations for it. I thought it was a low fantasy. I thought it was like set in the modern world, but it's actually a high fantasy. This is kind of like an alternate London type country place. So it follows Morgan having to do a bunch of trials to get into this society called the Wonder Society. They're kind of like the people who have like the strongest magical powers, and they kind of like look over the entire state. The second book is more exploring Morgan's kind of magical capability, which I'm not going to spoil because that's kind of in the first book. And she's just exploring kind of her identity, and I absolutely love the second book. If you love stories about just like really solid friendships, then the second book, oh man, it's so good. The third book though, oh my goodness. I voted for the third book, Hollowpox, for the Goodreads Choice Awards this year, not just because it was a really good book, but because it was such a 2020 book. What I mean by that is there were a lot of things in this book, even though it was written before 2020, that are so relevant to 2020. Let me give a few examples. There's a deadly virus, politics involved in the deadly virus. There are protests and riots and bigotry and abuse of power. And I think regardless of how you feel about any of those topics, like for example, COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, and like the riots and police and everything about that, regardless of how you feel about any of those things, you will find yourself in this story. I just felt like this book was just published at a perfect time. And unlike A Tale of Magic, while the Nevermoor series does explore a lot of like moral themes, it never ever comes across as preachy. They are just so well woven into the story that it's so subtle that you're just enjoying the story, but at the same time you're learning a lot of things about yourself and about the world and about the community and about the environment, just everything. The next book I'm going to talk about is The House with the Clock in Its Walls. I think this is technically a middle grade classic-ish fantasy horror. It was popular back in the day, and there was a film adaptation. But The House with the Clock in Its Walls follows our main character, Louis Barnevelt, who was just orphaned. His parents were killed in a car crash, and he has to live with his uncle, who is a wizard. His uncle lives in a house with a clock in its walls, and they can't find the clock, and this clock means something, and they have to figure it out. I really love this story. Technically, I feel like I was actually too old for this book, but after I read it, I was like, man, I wish I'd read this book when I was younger. Mainly because when I was younger, when I was about Louis Barnevelt's age, I was just like really insecure about my body and my weight and things like that. And Louis Barnevelt is a chubby kid, he's an overweight kid, and just having a main character of a book like that, oh, also he's a crybaby, which I was too at his age. And I felt like if I had read Louis Barnevelt at that age, that would have been so helpful to me, just have like self-confidence and just realize that I can be the hero of my own story, even though, and regardless of my weight or my looks or how I deal with my emotions. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Case of the Missing Marquis, which is the first book in the Enola Holmes mystery series. So The Case of the Missing Marquis is the first book in the Enola Holmes mysteries. And honestly, if you've been around Netflix or social media recently, you know that Enola Holmes has been adapted into a film starring Millie Bobby Brown, Henry Cavill, and Sam Claflin, and Helena Bonham Carter. And I really loved the movie, and actually read this book because I'd seen the trailer, and I was like, man, this kind of looks good. I read the book, and I was like, The book was sort of bland. It was okay. I didn't really like it. It was boring and cheesy and corny at parts, which, I mean, the movie was really cheesy, but I think they executed like the entire storyline really well. I really wanted to like this book, but it was just like, solid 3 stars. Man, and I realized that I've talked about a lot of books so far, but the last one I'm going to talk about is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, and it's not technically a series, it's like a duology. I've only read the first book. I've heard that the second book is actually better, but this first book I loved. I don't think I like it as much as many fans of Mitch Albom. 5 People You Meet in Heaven is about this guy named Eddie who is old and he dies in an accident. Can you hear the birds? Oh man, I love hearing the birds. Anyway, so it's about this guy and he dies and he meets 5 people in heaven who kind of like explain his life to him. It's a really heartwarming read, really cozy read. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I still liked it. I appreciated it. I don't know if I'll ever read more of Mitch Albom's book. I might read the sequel, which I've heard is a lot better than the first. Yeah, I like this book and I would recommend it to anyone who just wants a really heartwarming, cozy read that will just tug at your heartstrings. And that is it. And those are just the series or parts of a series that I've read this year. Because obviously quarantine, we've had a lot of time to read. I mean, obviously there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. I never lost a job. I don't have any loved ones who have had COVID, or at least not like severely. And so I guess I have to take a step back there. I'm grateful that I've been able to read more books this quarantine period. And I hope that even if you have been affected by COVID or you've lost a job or just have dealt with anxiety and depression through this whole lockdown quarantine thing, I hope that you have been able to find or will continue to find things that comfort you and just things that make you happy. Oh man, why am I getting emotional in like my second video that I've filmed? But anyway, I hope you guys have a great day. I'll be uploading more videos about kind of like my recap or wrap up sort of video for the entire year of 2020. I think I'll be doing classics next and popular books with like unpopular books after that. If you like this video, feel free to give this video a thumbs up. And please forget to subscribe so that you can do it later, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.